Hello, wonderful young Logo students. This is your favorite teacher, Johnny White, coming at you live and direct on YouTube. What? And man, it's been too long since I've seen you guys. I miss your faces. I don't miss all the interruptions. And so we're going to talk a little bit about our history assignment today, this week. We are in week number 3 or 4? I've lost track of our e-learning. You guys been doing great. Keep the responses that been getting were wonderful. So keep them coming. We're going to finish up World War II with one notable exception. You guys summarized the atom bombs being dropped and who fought on whose side and the leaders of the big countries. One thing we did not talk about, which is a gigantic part of World War II and human history, is the Holocaust. And I would hope most of you know the Holocaust was an attempt at genocide, which is wiping an entire group of people off the face of the planet. The Nazi attempt at committing genocide on Jewish people. Thankfully, it did not work, though they did murder in most atrocious ways over 6 million Jewish people. And so that lesson I want to do with you guys in person because I want to be able to emphasize just how atrocious it was. One of the worst, absolute worst chapters in human history of all time. It's just unspeakable crimes committed every day against Jewish men, women, and children in an awful part of history. So, Chris Cruz, now we're going to combine our American history classes before the whole pandemic and try to take you guys to the Holocaust Museum, which is a museum not far from Logos. And you see up close and personal graphic pictures of death camps and of, the Nazis would kill Jewish people in the death camps, or they could kill them on the street if they wanted to. It did not matter. They did whatever they wanted to, and it was absolutely horrendous. So I really want to emphasize that, and I want to be able to talk with you guys openly about it, not just have this video chat. So that's why I omitted the Holocaust. If hopefully we get back into school fairly shortly. If not, we will be doing special stuff about the Holocaust because it's something that everybody needs to know about. Because it is absolutely that bad, and I firmly believe that the more people know about it, the less chance of it ever occurring again against anybody, because that can't happen ever again against anyone. So, moving forward from there, the end of World War II, the Nazis surrendered on May 7th, 1945, which was just a little less than a year after the invasion of Normandy, also known as D-Day. You guys wrote a summary about that. And that was the U.S. and British and some Canadian, I believe even some Australian forces, storming the beach at Normandy, France, which was occupied by the Germans. The Germans had taken over huge chunks of France and held it for quite a while. And we were able to get a foothold there in France from that invasion on June 6, 1944. And from there, we were able to push through France and into Germany. And the war was over less than a year later, which is why I had you guys, of all the big events of World War II, that's a real big one. So Germany surrenders. Japan continues the fight on the other side of the world. We have to continue our island hopping campaign. At this point, we had gotten close to an island called Okinawa, which is not real far from Japan, and we were preparing for an invasion of the main Japanese islands, which some people thought the death toll would be over 1 million. And what had to be one of the worst decisions you could ever have to make, Harry Truman decided to drop the atom bomb, the first atom bomb the world has ever seen, on a city called Hiroshima on August 6th, 1945. Had a population, I'm not sure what the population was, but you see different numbers, but it killed I've seen numbers anywhere from 150,000 to 300,000, 350,000 people. Now, remember, those are mostly civilians. There probably weren't many soldiers around there. So you're talking about men who were too old to serve in the war, and the rest were women and children that had nothing to do with the war. So very, very agonizing, very, very controversial in history. The Japanese refused to surrender after that first bombing, and 3 days later, President Harry Truman ordered another bomb dropped on Nagasaki, which was a big industrial hub of Japan. Slightly smaller population, but still hundreds of thousands of people dead. I'm glad I would never have to make that decision, and that has been argued about whether we should have done it or not throughout history, and will always be debated. Should we have ended it right there, or should we have let the war go on, even with perhaps 1 million casualties coming up? I don't know who's wrong and who's right. I do know that Harry Truman, from the great state of Missouri, intentionally did not drop the bomb on Japan's capital and population center, Tokyo, simply so that he would minimize the loss of life. Had he dropped one of those on Tokyo, just that one bomb alone would have come close to killing a million people. So Japan surrenders to the United States September, I want to say 21st, 1945, on the deck of the USS Missouri. And the war's over. And remember, during the war, the Soviet Union had been on our side. And remember, the Soviet Union, which was called Russia during World War I, had also been on our side. But they also dropped out of World War I before it was fully over, because they were going through a revolution of themselves. And when that revolution ended, Russia became known as the Soviet Union and had a communist government. Now, we hate communist governments. We'll talk more about that a little later. But we needed the Soviet Union during World War II because we needed as much firepower turned on to the Nazis as we could get. And by the end of the war, the Soviet Union, which had been invaded by Germany during World War II, they were really hurting. Industrially, they were in bad shape. So we were sending them war materials for the last good chunk of the war. As I was saying, class, guns, bullets, and bombs. We were sending to them because we needed them to stay in the war, even though we did not like them. We needed them to continue to attack Germany from the east as we came from Germany's west. And the plan worked. And U.S. and Soviet troops met in the middle. They met in Germany, and the war's over. But immediately after the war, the Soviet Union is our number one enemy. And that begins what's the chapter in most history books called the Cold War. And the Cold War was a rivalry between the U.S. and our allies and the Soviet Union and their allies. And they call it the Cold War because the U.S. and the Soviet, we never actually fought the Soviet Union. That would have been a hot war. And had we fought the Soviet Union, it would have been very, very ugly. Because quickly after World War II, we have atom bombs, and then shortly thereafter, 1949, the Soviet Union has an atom bomb, and then they both progress to what we call nuclear warheads today, which are like 100 times more powerful. I don't know a whole lot about it. And between the two of us, we have enough nuclear warheads to destroy the Earth, quite frankly. So nobody wanted to fight, but we wanted to contain each other. So for the next 46 years, the Cold War officially ends in August of 1991 when the Soviet Union collapses. But for the next, for those 46 years, our foreign policy was dominated by containing communism and containing the Soviet Union and their influence throughout the world. Because the Soviet Union is going to essentially sponsor or ignite communist revolutions around the world. They'll get into South America and Central America and Asia. Hint, hint, the Korean War and the Vietnam War. So you've been asked this week to identify three kind of concepts and summarize three concepts of the Cold War. Before we get into those, we will talk about one of the concepts is the Japanese occupation by the U.S. Army. So what that was, and you can find real good summaries of this online. Just Google U.S. occupation of Japan. Um, and we sent soldiers and advisors and political advisors into Japan as soon as they surrendered to try to keep the peace with our soldiers and also to establish a new form of government. We didn't want them becoming communist. We did not want, because their government is essentially gone after we take over. So we established a constitution much like our own. It's still in place today. They do not have a president, they have a prime minister, but he's elected by the people, I believe. They have one, I believe it's one House of Parliament as opposed to our two houses of Congress, and they are elected by the people. They may actually elect a prime minister, as happens in England. But it's a democratically elected free market government that we trade with a lot. So they are a good friend of ours. And when I say trade, that means that we sell their goods over here and our goods are sold over there. We all know of lots of Japanese goods sold here, PlayStations, Nintendos, Toyotas, Nissans, all that stuff. So we have a lot of trade with them, which makes both countries a lot of money, which is why we like them. So tell me about the Japanese U.S. occupation of Japan. How long we were there, what the government was that we set up, that kind of stuff. Just give me, the dates, the major players, who was president here, who was kind of in charge of it, all that good stuff. You were also asked to summarize two different concepts that kind of go together: the Iron Curtain and the Marshall Plan. We'll start with the Iron Curtain. Essentially, what happened at the end of World War II with Europe was the big four, the U.S., France, England, and Russia, Soviet Union, all sit down and kind of divide up Europe. And we even divided up the country of Germany into four sections. And every country of those big four countries, they would all kind of help to restore peace and things like power and electricity and water services and all that kind of stuff within these countries or in sections of Berlin, which was split into four. And then we would all return them to the power of those own countries. And that was the plan. And along, especially with Germany and Berlin, that happened in three of the four counts. The U.S., France, and Great Britain, we all turned our chunks of Germany back over to the German people and let them run things, including the city of Berlin. However, the Soviet Union held on to their chunk of Germany, which became East Germany, which is no longer a country, and their chunk of Berlin, which became East Berlin. We'll talk more about that later. But essentially what Soviet Union does with East Germany, East Berlin, and the countries there right on the kind of western border of the Soviet Union was they either directly took control or they sent in people to kind of discreetly take control, establish what are called puppet governments, puppet communist governments. So those kind of formed their allies all of a sudden. And that's the Iron Curtain. And I'll let you guys explain it in your summaries. Give me what the countries were, who the leaders were, what year they fell to the communists. And if you can't tell me what year they come out of communism, that's going a little farther. And the Soviet Union did this for a lot of reasons, one of which my dad used to always tell me, history through Jack White, was that, the Soviet Union / Russia had fought Germany twice. Started in 1914 in World War I, and again started in 1941. And Germany had invaded the Soviet Union during World War II, and I think 20 million Soviet people were killed. It was absolutely brutal. They lost far more people than any other country. So a lot of people think the Soviet Union was just kind of putting a boundary, a border of countries so that there would never be another war on Soviet soil. So that may be one reason. But so that's the Iron Curtain. Secondly, the Marshall Plan kind of goes hand in hand with the Iron Curtain. And this came around after the Soviet Union had taken those countries. And it was a bill a plan, a proposal by U.S. General George Marshall, I believe it was, in 1949, I do believe. And it essentially gave the pledge to the United States to help any country that was resisting communism. And it starts with Europe, and that could be financial assistance, it could be military assistance. If you were worried about the spread of communism in your country, we would come to your aid. Eventually, that's going to go worldwide, as I said earlier, and we're going to be trying to work against the communists all over the world. And there are still big communist countries around, some of whom we get along with. China, we get along with decently well. Vietnam, we get along with well. And the last kind of question I wanted to bring up for today was, how can we hate communist countries so much? And there are really kind of two ways to look at this, and I don't know which one is right. I'm not telling you which I believe, and I'm sure there are more than two. The one you hear a lot of times, especially from our government officials, is the way that the communists treat their citizens. There are almost no human rights. If the Soviet Union wanted to lock you up, you would be locked up. And we've talked about this before. There was no Bill of Rights in the Soviet Union, no freedom of speech, no right to petition the government, none of that. No cruel and unusual punishment. If they wanted to send you above the Arctic Circle, which they did to thousands and thousands, to a work camp up there, where it might be, 27 degrees for the high for the day, and you're in very ragged clothing working outside all day, they do that. And if you died quickly, that was okay too with them. And there have been numerous human rights violations from communist countries around the world throughout the time, and they, have authoritarian rulers, dictators that don't have to answer to the people or anybody else, and it really is a crummy system under which to live, no doubt about it. In most cases. So there's that end of it, the human rights end of it. A lot of people will tell you that it's also about money. Typically, when countries fall to communism, the communists, what's called, close the borders. Nothing can go in or out. That's changed over the decades. But back when this was all going on, way back when, if you wanted to go to the Soviet Union, you couldn't. You weren't allowed. You couldn't just go online and get a plane ticket into the Soviet Union. Nope. East Germany. Nope. Poland. Nope. Couldn't go. And more than that, the U.S. is about free enterprise and free trade, and we like to sell our goods overseas, and we let other countries sell their goods here, and it's all to make money, and it's all about taxes. The individual owners of the corporations or the stockholders make money. The government makes money off of taxes. It's quite lucrative. Makes a lot of cash. And we sell American products and have sent American products around the world for a long, long time. There's nowhere in this, I was going to say there's nowhere in this world that you can't go and buy a Coca-Cola. I'm sure there are some places, but, Coca-Cola and Gatorade and Nike and all those things are sold all around the world. There are McDonald's. There is a McDonald's in Moscow, the capital of Russia. So we even got a McDonald's in there. So some people say it's financial. Some people say it's about human rights and personal liberties. It may be down the middle somewhere. There may be other factors too. But that's why we had this big taboo against communist countries. So get those summaries written in for me. We will have a meeting on a Zoom meeting on Thursday at 11 o'clock. I'll get all the information sent to all of your emails. I miss seeing your faces. I miss the interaction. I don't miss all the interruptions. But I hope you are well. Please be safe. Stay inside. I know it's a drag. I am so tired of it too. But we got to do what's best for all of us. So please stay safe. And I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Adios.